Welcome to the EMT Spot's Blood Pressure Podcast. I'm Samuel Harrison,
And I'm Olivia Harper.
ready to dive into something a bit unusual today.
Always. What have we got?
Well, the question we're tackling is this. Do certain accents or languages actually cause someone's blood pressure to rise?
That's a good one. Definitely not something I've ever thought about before.
Right. Sounds a bit out there, but stick with us. The research is fascinating.
I'm intrigued already.
So to get us started, let's think about a doctor, Dr. Alvarez, a physician originally from Guatemala who practices in New York City.
Okay.
Now she's brilliant, but sometimes her accent can lead to misunderstandings with patients.
Oh, I can see how that could be tricky.
Exactly. And it really highlights how even subtle differences in pronunciation, especially in a high-pressure environment like healthcare,
Right. Yeah.
can really have an impact.
For sure. And I imagine for medical professionals with accents, that pressure to communicate clearly, especially in emergencies,
Oh, absolutely.
must be really immense.
Absolutely. And that brings us to a key point here. Stress.
Oh,
We all know stress can directly affect blood pressure.
yeah.
And these communication difficulties, they can definitely be a source of stress.
Makes sense.
So we've got these accents, stress, and blood pressure all kind of swirling around.
Yeah.
Let's bring in some hard science here.
Okay.
We found a 1981 study titled The Effects of Talking on the Blood Pressure of Hypertensive and Normotensive Individuals.
1981, huh? Is that still relevant?
Well, you might think that, but what's really interesting is they used a pretty advanced, for the time, non-invasive blood pressure device that let them track changes in real time.
Oh, wow. So they could really see what was happening as people were talking.
Yeah, and what they found. Simply talking caused blood pressure to spike, both in people with normal blood pressure and those with hypertension.
Oh, wow. So just the act of talking itself.
Yeah, but here's where it gets even more interesting. Those folks who already had higher resting blood pressure
Okay.
saw even bigger jumps when they were talking.
Wow. So it was amplified almost.
Exactly. The
Right.
study found that some people with hypertension experience blood pressure jumps of 25 to 40% within just 30 seconds of starting to speak.
Oh, my goodness. That's huge.
That's enormous,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it begs the question, why would just talking have this big of an impact on blood pressure?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
The researchers actually proposed that difficulty communicating might lead to stress, which then bumps up the blood pressure.
Oh, that makes sense. Especially when we think about Dr. Alvarez,
Right.
that potential for stress when you're worried about being misunderstood because of an accent.
It all ties together.
Yeah, it really does.
So we've got this link between talking, stress, and blood pressure.
Right.
But what does it all mean for you listening right now? Have you ever noticed your own blood pressure rising during a stressful conversation?
That's something to think about, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about how communication styles, including accents, might be playing a role in those situations.
Definitely food for thought.
We'll dig into that a bit more after a quick word from our sponsors.
So we've seen that communication, especially in those high-stakes situations, can really affect blood pressure.
Yeah.
But what can medical professionals with accents actually do to make sure they're communicating clearly and, maybe even reduce stress for themselves and their patients?
It's a great question, and one of our sources actually addresses that directly.
Okay.
It's an article titled English-Speaking Tips for Healthcare Workers.
Okay.
And it's got some really practical advice for non-native English speakers working in healthcare.
So let's dive into that. What kind of tips are we talking about?
Well, one of the key points is focusing on pronunciation,
Yeah,
especially when it comes to medical terminology.
makes sense.
I mean, think about a word like sphygmomanometer.
Oh, yeah.
Not exactly easy to say, even for native English speakers.
Right. And I imagine in a fast-paced environment,
Oh, absolutely.
it's got to be even tougher.
Exactly. And it's not just about getting individual words right, but also mastering things like rhythm and intonation. Right. And stress patterns, which can be so different depending on your native language.
So it's really about more than just the individual words.
Exactly. It's about the whole flow and sound of the language.
Got it.
And the article really emphasizes clear vowel pronunciation as a key part of mastering the American accent,
Okay.
which is what patients in the U.S. are often expecting.
Yeah.
And they also talk about the importance of getting word stress right, because American English speakers tend to elongate those stressed syllables.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. And the article also mentioned something that I thought was really helpful.
What's that?
They suggest recording yourself while you're interacting with patients,
Oh, interesting.
and then listening back to see if there are any words or phrases that might be causing confusion.
Oh, that's smart. Almost like having your own personal coach for your accent.
Exactly. And speaking of coaches, I remember the article mentioned an app called Bold Voice
Oh, yeah?
that helps non-native English speakers improve their pronunciation and communication.
Yeah. They have personalized accent reduction courses, which could be great for busy healthcare professionals.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's not all on the individual. The article emphasizes that healthcare institutions also need to play a role.
Okay, so what kind of support are we talking about here?
Well, things like offering cultural competency training for all staff,
Right.
making sure interpreter services are available,
Yeah.
and even having accent reduction programs as part of professional development.
Sounds like it's about creating a more inclusive and supportive environment.
Absolutely. And beyond speaking clearly, the article also talks about the importance of active listening.
Oh, that's key.
It's not just about getting your message across, but really making sure you understand what your patients are saying.
Right, because even with perfect pronunciation, communication can break down if you're not really listening to your patient.
Exactly. And they give some great tips like using active listening skills,
Okay.
showing empathy, asking clarifying questions, and not interrupting or rushing patients.
Those are all good tips for any healthcare professional, really.
Absolutely. And when patients feel heard and understood,
Yeah.
it can really reduce stress for everyone.
For sure.
And that lower stress level can lead to better patient care and maybe even impact blood pressure regulation.
It's fascinating to see how all these things connect. The accents, communication, stress, and blood pressure.
It really is.
And makes you think back to that 1981 study we talked about.
Yeah.
Could improving communication skills and minimizing that accent-related stress actually play a role in better blood pressure management?
It's a great question.
It really is. We've covered a lot today, but before we wrap up, we want to thank you for tuning in to the EMT Spot's Blood Pressure Podcast.
It's been a really fascinating look at this connection between accents, communication, and blood pressure.
I'm Samuel Harrison.
And I'm Olivia Herper.
If you found this episode interesting, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and leave us a comment.
And don't forget to share this episode with your friends, colleagues, or anyone who might find it interesting.
As you go about your day, think about this. Could improving our communication skills and minimizing that accent-related stress actually help with better blood pressure management, both for patients and healthcare providers?
It's definitely something to consider.
Until next time, stay curious
And keep those conversations flowing.
and keep that blood pressure in check.